Welcome to Podcasting for Business, episode 12. Ronsley, how are you?
Good. I am good. I'm excited. It's next week is my birthday week, and you just finished your birthday week, so
Let the good times roll.
let the good times roll, buddy.
And speaking of good times, we have Byron Dempsey. Let's bring him in right now. Byron, he's live from Sydney in Australia. Amazing guy doing some incredible things with the Driven Young brand. Byron, thanks for joining us, and how you doing?
My pleasure. And I should just say my birthday week was the week before. So there you go.
Happy birthday to all of us. What a great time it is for the for the world.
It is.
With us three.
It is the special. It is the special. I know a lot of people born in this bracket, and all of them are like amazing humans, and well, present company included.
Yeah, the May-June bracket.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, if this is your first time joining us at Podcasting for Business, we use this show to help business owners get more listeners, get more clients, and get more credibility, all from a podcast. If you have a story about how a podcast has helped or hindered your business, we would love to get in touch and feature you on the show. So drop a comment or send a DM to Ronsley or myself, and we'll get you on the show. It'd be great to chat about your journey. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to go through Byron's podcasting journey, all the incredible things he achieved as a videographer, now as a podcaster, a business owner. He's done a huge amount of incredible things and continues to raise the bar. So he's going to have a lot of great lessons for us. I'm going to share the big mistake for today, which is a good one. Ronsley is going to share the tactic for today, which are the basic elements you need to be able to create an irresistible offer. And, you know, if you want to know what that's for, you're going to have an irresistible offer for your audience where they feel bad saying no. So that one's an absolute no-brainer. So make sure you stick around for that. And we want to make sure this show gets viewed as far and wide as possible. So hit the like button, hit the comment button. If something that we share lands with you or that you disagree with, just drop a comment. Let us know how you're feeling. Share it with your network. We'd really appreciate that as well, so we can help more business owners, get more listeners, more clients, and more credibility. We've also put together a document of the 10 biggest mistakes business owners make with the podcast, as well as how to fix them. So you can go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com to get a free copy of that, or comment mistakes below and we'll get that sent out to you. Byron, let's bring Byron on right now. I would love for you to kick off by just sharing a bit about when you first heard about the power of podcasting, and when did you make the decision to say, yes, you know what, I am going to start a podcast?
Well, funny enough, it was at 2018 We Are Podcast Conference, which is Ronsley invited me. I don't think I knew you at the time, James. So Ronsley invited me to just speak on video. And I kind of did a 1 hour workshop, I think, on the power of video and how you can leverage that for your podcast. And I didn't realize the power of podcasting until I went to that and I saw all the big hitters and they're talking about how much it's affected their business. And I went, oh, this is something that's really big. And obviously since 2018, podcasts have kind of everyone's got a podcast now, but at the time it was definitely more the business owners I knew, not the everyday people. And so that was the kind of switch for me, was being surrounded by these incredible podcasters and seeing how much it impacted their lives.
So thank you, because I love these stories, right? I had Steph on the show earlier and she said the same thing and I felt really good. So thank you for that. The We Are podcast journey has been insane for me. I keep saying, I mean, I've started a lot of businesses, but for me, making We Are podcast was the biggest entrepreneurial leap, like had the biggest fetal position moments is the best way to put it as an entrepreneur. Yeah. Creating We Are podcast. What was that journey like for you, becoming an entrepreneur, like doing your thing, finding your space in the world, and how was the podcast part of that, or was it part of that at all?
Yeah, so for me, the podcast was the beginning of everything. Like, I now run a company called Driven Young. I've got a program called the Driven Young program. And all of that came from my podcast, which is called Driven Young. And so I guess there's that analogy where it's like if you're on a ship, you don't just jump off into the water. You want to wait until another ship comes along and jump off into that. And that's kind of an analogy for like if you're working a full-time job, you don't just quit and go full-time on your business. You've got to build it up as a bit of a side hustle. So for me, it took me about 1.5 years before I could go full-time on Driven Young and the podcast. Meanwhile, I was doing a whole bunch of video marketing stuff with both of you guys. You guys know about that company. And then I was able to transition into full-time, and that all came from the podcast. All my ideas came from that. My confidence as a speaker came from that. I now present professionally, and I think I was able to skip a lot of training and presenting because I've been presenting on a podcast for over 2 years now. So pretty much everything I've kind of attribute to where I am today came from the podcast back when I started it in 2019.
So just so that I'm getting the timeline right, was We Are Podcast one of your first like presenting, opportunity speaking sort of stages?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I was just talking about content now, but now I've been getting trained up for the past 2 years, and I've got I use NLP and I use all these strategies. But yeah, We Are Podcast was definitely one of the first opportunities. I was very nervous, and very appreciative for that, for that opportunity.
Yeah.
10th and 11th of November, Byron. We haven't even spoken to you about this, but hopefully Byron can attend. We'd love to have you speaking and joining the crew. A big part of your success has come from getting around the right people. You and I have spoken previously about Dent and the people from Dent that you were involved with, real world mentors with real world business experience. You just shared what happened at We Are Podcast. What were the biggest shifts that had for you from a mindset perspective or a business growth perspective that enabled you to accelerate your business so much faster than you would have had without that mentorship?
Oh, I mean, you know this, James. I brought you on my podcast specifically to do an episode all about networking. So you know the power of that. That's your bread and butter. But absolutely, for me, it was like, if we use presenting as probably the biggest example for me, because I'm running this program, Empower You, and I've had Brent, who's been training me up for the past 18 months. Like, I've been able to skip, I guess what took him probably 8 years to learn, he's taught me that in a year because he's mentoring me. He didn't have a mentor. He had to figure it all out. It was trial and error. Whereas for me, every time I get off stage, he's got notes for me, and I can the next week when I'm presenting it, I can practice and practice. So that's probably been the most tangible example of how valuable having a mentor has been for me. But then also just surrounding yourself with good quality people. Whether I consider a lot of my friends to be mentors, whether they're not actually sitting down and mentoring me, but I learn from them. I learn from how they run their stuff. A lot of my friends are self-employed as well. So, the whole reason I created my program, the Driven Young program, is to build connections for people. So almost everything I do is about helping connect people together. It's probably, in my opinion, the most important thing you can do in your early 20s.
Well, you're talking to three people here who are all based around connection, like connecting people. Probably the email I get the most is like, hey, can you introduce me to this person or that person? I think in some capacity. I want to talk about the podcast in particular, because I feel you made a statement at the start, which I thought it was just my perception of the world, because I'm sort of, I drive a black Outlander, so I see them everywhere. But you made a statement about how now everyone has a podcast. What were the things that happened to you along the way that you did not expect to happen as a result of having the podcast? Like, okay, you started the podcast, you had an intention in mind, but what other things happened along the way that was like, oh, I didn't know this was going to happen?
Oh my God. So, this is a 10-minute answer, but like to condense it.
Take your time.
When I started the podcast, obviously, I guess, selfishly, everyone wants to get listeners, right? But I always say there's infinite benefits to having a podcast if you have 0 listeners. First of all, you get the opportunity to meet people when you shouldn't be meeting them, because people won't sit down and get a coffee with you sometimes if they're quite high up, but they'll do a podcast with you because people love to talk about themselves. And so that was a huge opportunity. The connections and the doors that have opened through a podcast. For example, Empower, you mentioned the presenting, that came because I got Dale Bowman on the podcast, and then Dale at the end of the podcast introduced me to his best mate, who's Brent, and now Brent's my mentor, and I learned from him, and that's been an incredible change in my life. That all came from the podcast. All of my immediate friends came from my podcast. They've all been on the show. They all are 1,000-door connections to the podcast. My birthday party, which I just had, I remember I was thinking, like, I think 85% of the people that had come along to my birthday party were at some point connected to the podcast, whether someone introduced me to someone or whatever. Had I not started the podcast, I wouldn't have known these people. So, pretty much everything in my life has originated from this podcast, whether I had listeners or not. TikTok, which I'm sure we can talk about, which is all my podcasting content. So, really, it's infinite. It's infinite. Everything good in my life has originated at some point through the podcast. And I always encourage people to start a podcast for that reason, not for the listener reason, but because of the growth and the people you're going to meet.
Yeah, you got to experience that firsthand just to experience the power of that. Your Driven Young community that you've created has now got more than 1 million people in it. You're doing such a great job with that. You mentioned listener growth there. What have you done specifically, or what tips do you have for people to be able to get more listeners and more subscribers for their podcast?
Yeah, so for me, honestly, I've kind of nailed the one skill, and we're really looking at breaking out into more traditional pathways. But for me, I use long form video content, which is basically filming your podcast, taking that up and dissecting that into little small snippets and distributing that across social media. For me, TikTok has been the biggest game changer. So I can get easy 20 to 30 clips for a podcast. I once got 70 clips from one podcast. That was probably overkill. But that's been the biggest way that I've grown my podcasts. And we're actually looking at my other podcast, my entertainment podcast. We're looking at signing with a network now, and we're going to use some more traditional ways by going on other people's podcasts and really growing through that and scaling through that. But for me, I definitely think I've definitely nailed the video aspect side of it, and now I'm looking to grow into the other ones.
Yeah, a lot of people are concerned about how do they grow and get the word out there on a more consistent basis. But using an existing asset that you, as a single master asset, you can create micro pieces of content that enable you to get massive traction. Like I think you've got more than, almost 500,000 followers just from your personal brand alone, let alone your sort of brand portfolio of other ones, which people can outsource if they don't have the expertise or time to do themselves. You can grow your business massively. It can lead to leads for your business, all of these different things. Buyers of the book that you had came out, people for your gap year project. All of these different opportunities have happened because you've kicked open the door using existing content, and it means that you don't have to do that thing that people hate of holding the phone up and what am I going to do to record another selfie video at the moment.
That's it. And people get crippled by how much, like, let's say I say you got to post 3 times a week. They go, oh my God, how do I got to plan out 3 videos a week. No, that's actually just 1 podcast a month. You know what I mean? And so like I post 4 times a day on TikTok, and that's easy. I could post more, to be honest. I have so much content, and most of my videos don't do that well, but because I post so regularly, I only need 1 out of 10. And that's, a viral video every 2 days. And so that's my strategy, the long form content strategy. And to be honest, that's only recently, it's gotten so much harder to grow on TikTok. If I was posting this content a year ago, it would have been a lot easier. But you've got to adapt. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think if you're not videoing your podcast and dissecting it up, I think that's a missed opportunity because you're already doing all the hard work. You're already doing the interview. You've already done all the groundwork. All you have to do is hit record and just send it off to an editor.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're doing here. I mean, what we used to do is have the interview in a silo where, it was just over Zoom or whatever other platform. But then going through Clubhouse, and James and I doing a whole year of Clubhouse, like we would do these really insane conversations with a whole bunch of people that would talk on a certain topic that we picked. So we would get this, crazy sort of episode. So we decided to do this show. But I want to get a breakdown of your ecosystem because a lot has changed, obviously, since we spoke last. But like you change and a lot, and hats off to you keeping on, right? Because I think that's that's the key to entrepreneurship is just being in the game for long enough. What does your ecosystem look like right now? You said everything starts from the podcast, but how did you get there? You started with the podcast, you started doing your video and your content, and then what happened next? And what is the ecosystem like today?
Oh man, my ecosystem is big. I'm still figuring it out, right? I'm still in early stages, in my opinion. But I mean, Driven Young, the main thing from Driven Young is what I'm really trying to push is my Driven Young program, which is, James mentioned the gap year. So I've had to rename it due to a few reasons, marketing mainly. And that's a 3-month program for young people. That's an in-person in Sydney, a social program and educational. We do events every single week, from bush hikes to house parties to drinking games to how to change a tire. And then we do workshops every Monday. And I'm really trying to grow that as my main revenue source. But we've also got brand deals coming in. I'm also speaking at Empower You, which is a kind of like Tony Robbins for teenagers. It's like personal development for teenagers. We teach goal setting, money and finance, communication skills, emotional intelligence, critical thinking. What else do we do? A whole bunch of really cool stuff. A lot of dancing, a lot of incredible stuff. So that's a big part of my ecosystem as well. I'm running that. Like I'm running 19 weekends next year. So almost half the weekends I'm doing next year will just be presenting all day, 12 hours a day, Saturday, Sunday. Then we've got the book, which is part of the ecosystem, 18 and Lost, so are we. I've got all the podcasts, the video content, And I've also got a new podcast called Byron and Pace, which is an entertainment podcast, which is with my roommate. And we've managed to grow that to 450,000 followers in about 6 months using this strategy I just mentioned to you guys. And we're just about to get signed with a podcast network for that. And we're going to a whole bunch of events with that. I just went to The Boys premiere, which is one of my favorite Amazon Prime shows. And I got to interview some of the guests there. So I'm even looking at kind of starting to interview big name celebrities in a more traditional medium. So I'm also working on a property project to help young people to get into the property market. And I'm just looking at doing a deal with a company who want to like use my face as a job board, and I can create a driven young job board where young people can go to find jobs that are relevant to them, and I can just make it relevant to young people. So not like jobs that require 10 years experience, but like internships and casual jobs for when they're at uni, and I'll get paid based on applications there as well. So it's all kind of like in the air right now, and I'm trying to like compress it into a nice tight model, but there's lots of really cool opportunities happening. And again, they all come and stem from me launching the podcast back in 2019.
Byron, that's just incredible. So congrats to you on all the amazing things you're doing. I feel like so many people don't understand that the biggest struggle is getting to like your first 1,000 listeners or your first 1,000 subscribers, that type of thing. As you're experiencing right now, the opportunities that you attract as a result of that is such a big one. But having that consistency to put things out there on a regular basis, as well as the persistence to continue, even if you don't feel the download numbers or the subscriber numbers ticking over so much, has been such a big part of that. So I would love it if you could speak to that, and also perhaps share an insight into the thing that I love most about you, Byron, is how committed you are to always raising the bar, never, ever, ever resting on your laurels. It's always focusing on what can I do to make this bigger and better, and just continue to grow and expand.
Yeah, I mean, it's so brutal podcasting because it's very one way. There's no feedback. Like you get reviews, but like you don't get a hell of a lot. And I was even thinking the other day, because I post on YouTube and I haven't done very well on YouTube, but I want to up that. But like my YouTube comments are so positive, and I had one video got like 1,000, 1,500 views. And I had like 20 comments, and everyone was like, "This is the most incredible podcast I've ever seen." And I was like, it was actually really nice to get like feedback on the podcast. And I was like, man, I've never had that. Like, because podcasting is one way, and it's really brutal. And there's a concept we talk about called the audience of none. What would you do to an audience of 0 people? What would you do on stage if no one was watching, if no one was listening? And to me, podcasting is that to a T. Because when you start a podcast, you're going to have an audience of none unless you've got an existing audience. And you've got to understand that's okay. And if you're doing it for the downloads, you're in it for the wrong reason, because it's very, very difficult to grow a podcast, as I'm sure you guys are aware. But the benefits from it are infinite, as I've already mentioned. So I think it's incredibly important not to get caught up in the numbers and understand, more focus on the impact. Like for me, at the beginning of every episode, I really encourage people to DM me, because it's one way. The things that keep me going are the Instagram messages I get. And I've had messages from people who are like, "Hey man, I want to buy you a coffee. I just landed an $80,000 scholarship based off some of the advice in your podcast." I've saved like 4 from like 4 14-year-old girls from Canada, Argentina, and Germany. And they all sent me this huge message about how the podcast has helped change their life. And to me, that's more important than downloads or anything. And so it's really just focusing on the audience of none concept, because it's really hard. Like, I think people think podcasting is easy. It's not, especially long term. Like I mentioned before, everyone's starting a podcast. I think everyone is starting a podcast, but very few people are consistently doing a podcast, because most people give up after 8 episodes, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, you've got your heart in it. And even considering the prospect of something called the Root Mentor, like all the people that you are now the Root Mentor of so many people, all the people that you mentioned there, what about all the people that they're able to impact, and all the people that they're able to impact? And it just spreads from there. It's absolutely massive. Why don't we turn to our big mistake right now, Byron? We could chat to you forever. The big mistake for today is number 64 of our list of 70 mistakes. So if you go and download a copy of the 10 biggest mistakes, as part of that, you'll also see the full list of 70 mistakes. So you can go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com to download a copy of that free guide. Our mistake today, number 64, buying an expensive microphone. I mean, it's the classic case of all the gear and no idea. Like, if you don't know how to even use a microphone to begin with, it's such a big issue. I'm not going to speak any more on this topic, because Byron, I feel like you and Ronsley are so much more qualified than I am to talk about this stuff. So how do you guys feel about this mistake?
Oh, it's a big one, man. This is, I mean, if you've got 70 mistakes, this has to be top 10, in my opinion. Like, I mean, for me, microphones, less of a big deal, because microphones are relatively cheap. Like, the most expensive microphone is like $800, but video, oh my God, like people spend so much money on video. You can drop, 10 grand on a camera easy. And so, like, I think for me, the biggest example is for the first 100 episodes, I shot every clip on my phone. So I filmed everything on my phone and my DSLR camera, which I already had lying around. And so I didn't spend any money on video equipment. I got the 2 microphones I got, I think it cost me $320 for both microphones combined and the kit. And it was like Rode. And the only reason I've upgraded is because my roommate has the Shure, the microphone you're using right now, which is the best on the market, and I just have them around. Otherwise, I still wouldn't pay for those because they're like $800, and that's a lot of money. And yeah, it's really, I think the big issue is it's sexy. It's really fun and sexy to buy new equipment, but it's not necessary.
I think that's the case.
You're a video guy. You mentioned you film this stuff on your iPhone. I mean, that's huge. I started off filming, like I still do the ones that I'm at home. If they're a solo episode on video, I just use the phone. The quality in these things is incredible. Ronsley?
Well, yeah, I mean, go, Byron.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, did you see the new Apple update with the iPhone as a webcam? Like that, I'm sure you guys have seen that as podcasters. You can convert your iPhone and mount it on the back of your camera and use that as your camera, which is way better than this Logitech camera I've got. So that's super exciting for virtual podcasts as well.
Yeah, it's very seamless. And now that James over the last 5 days has moved over to a Mac, he'll be able to experience all this seamless connectivity that we've been experiencing for a while now.
A lot more grey hair from this stressful week of getting getting used to the MacBook after my entire life with Windows.
It's so funny because James, when he's just moved over, for ladies and gentlemen, just for context here, right? Just so that we're all on the same page to see what I have to deal with, because everyone thinks James is the nice guy. He probably is. He's the nice of the two. But here's the thing: for the last few days, he's been telling me that, but this Mac doesn't have a backspace that works properly. I'm like, is that your biggest worry? Can you know what you can do seamlessly with this whole Mac ecosystem and the backspace?
Is that like deleting files, James?
No, it's like I had one issue installing an application the other day, which was pretty funny. I probably shouldn't share that one. It was like the most basic thing. It's like drag a program into this icon.
Oh, yeah,
I was looking for the icon on the desktop rather than literally thinking that was actually.
Oh, it was right there.
So,
Yeah.
That wasted about half an hour of my life. I'm not kidding. And then the backspace key, it just takes so long to, or the delete, whatever, whatever. Long story. I'm getting a lot more comfortable with it. It was the list of 70 mistakes that we spoke about before. I feel like I have a list of 70 things I missed from Windows, but the advice I received was don't try and turn this into a Windows computer. Enjoy it for what it is and just get used to it. So I think that was very good advice.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to see you've made the transition.
Yeah.
The dark side officially.
It is. Once you go Mac, they say, right? And I want to talk about the microphone because I feel like it is this notion that the most expensive microphone, the $800 microphone, is the one. I've got the 800. I've got 3 of those in here, but I'm using the Shure SM58, which is the gold standard of microphones on stage. So it's been. There's a meme out there about the hardest things on the planet, gold, platinum, and there's a Shure SM58 along with that, right? So, and I believe that it gives the best kind of sound, and it's like under $200 for this particular microphone. But the reason this is such a important topic is I feel like people get caught up in what kind of microphone to buy. And they go buy the most expensive one, and then they think that their podcast is going to be good because they have a really good microphone. And that is the thing that we want to avoid, is the outsourcing of, Driven Young is a great example, because before our generation, I suppose, everyone outsourced what they thought of people depending on the degrees they had. If someone had 2 degrees, they're like, oh, this person is really well respected. And I think that's the same thing with equipment or the podcast. We outsource what it means to make a successful podcast. And you must have I remember you interviewing me with lav mics, if I'm correct, which are super cheap.
Yeah, and they were cheap. They're the cheapest lav mics I could find because I didn't have a huge amount of money. But that was because I met you outside. Like, obviously, ideally, I'd rather have the microphones, but again, it works. Like, no one reached out complaining about the audio quality. It wasn't as good, but it was still high. It was still enough to hear it. And look, audio quality is really important because there's so many podcasts coming out. I think the bare minimum is good quality audio. Like no one's going to listen to a crackly, like no one's going to listen to that now. But also like you can get, as you mentioned, you can get incredible microphones. I spent $300 to get my whole setup. And I still use that today. And now I've got this is a USB Shure microphone I got as a gift for myself for Christmas. And it just plugs into the computer and I use it on the go and I use it for my computer now. And I think that was $300 as well. So we're not talking big money here and you can get incredible audio. So I think the issue is it's sexy and people like to use that so they can avoid tackling the big issues with podcasting, which is what's my niche? What am I going to talk about? How am I going to approach this? How am I going to market it? It's a lot easier just to be like, oh, let's just focus on the equipment for now and I can worry about that later. Whereas that's the least important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if I could give just one piece of advice from my own journey, and what you guys have said there is 100% spot on and so important and so powerful. Any piece of equipment you buy, spending an hour or a few hours figuring out how to use it properly is so big. I wish I could go back in time when I was a guest on all these shows. I didn't watch a single video on how to actually use the microphone. Just a simple tweak like that would just make such a massive difference, because the quality of how you sound is going to make a difference in the quality of how people feel and all those types of things. So just watching an instructional video on YouTube or whatever it is on how to use the bloody thing that you've just spent a lot of money on.
Yeah. And I mean, like even because you want to know how to use it because you're going to get in situations where stuff goes wrong and you need to be able to fix it. Like I still record all my podcasts. I don't have anyone. Like I still set up the cameras. I still set everything up today. And I can't see myself outsourcing that unless I was really big. And so, I need to know how all the cameras work. When something stops recording, I need to be able to figure it out why. And I've had that so many times. I've made a lot of mistakes in this journey. I even had to re-record an episode for the first time 3 weeks ago and he didn't mind. And it was better than the first one, but I lost the audio file and I still don't know how I did that. So I think you really do need to be switched on with Google Drive, Dropbox software, the equipment you're using. Like it's a bare minimum if you want to take this seriously.
Yeah. And that would be James's nightmare, losing a video file. Hey, James.
It would be. That really would be. Yeah, to actually call someone back and be like, I know we had a really great time. Yeah. I suppose for the most part, if it was someone who you're at least on okay terms with who lives locally, the opportunity to get back in and have another great conversation. Yes. I mean, at least you could redo it and go from there. But yes, it would be not ideal from an efficiency at a time perspective and everything else. Well, the moment I get a video file back from the video editor, who it's through Google Drive. I then upload it into a cloud drive as well. So there's multiple backups immediately.
So do I. And I still stuffed up somehow. Like, I don't know how I had the video files. So I actually had the audio from the cameras, which is really average. But I didn't have the audio. And I was like, oh, what do I do? And he lives locally. And I actually waited like 4 or 5 months. And then I was like, hey, dude, look, here's a deal. And he was like, yeah, I'll come back out and we reshot it all. And it's done really well. I'm posting his clips now. So yeah, but that's the biggest mistake I've made, which isn't even that bad. But again, you can reduce that by, I think what we just mentioned, having a cloud system is absolutely 100% needs to be happening. Google Cloud or Dropbox, you have to be on there.
Let me
fail.
Let me just make everyone's life a lot easier and say that when I lost my file, it was with the CEO of VaynerMedia in New York City.
Oh my God.
And and I tell this story because I was so upset about the fact that happened. But them becoming clients was like even better. So I didn't, maybe I didn't have the interview, which I don't. But what happened after that has been a huge impact, which is what you're saying, to the effect that podcasting brings up all these things that really, you don't. It's not necessarily about the episode, but it should be about the episode. I want to just talk about a bit of it, something you said earlier, Byron, about starting the podcast and what people should care about. So, can you go deeper into those things? Because I feel like you have something to say there. Yeah. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I get a lot of people reaching out, asking us to help with podcasting. And to be honest, my roommate and I, we get a lot of people around TikTok and podcasting, and I get sick of giving advice when people don't implement it, because most people don't, and it's very frustrating. But for me, the biggest thing when it comes to a podcast, I think, is you have to find a niche. And there's a few ways you can niche. Like for me, my niche is audience and age group. So I niche by I teach young people practical life skills, but then within that, I can teach any skill I want. So my podcast covers a whole variety of different things, but the niche is the age and the target market. Or you could niche to anyone, but your niche is health and fitness. And so I think you have to find a niche. Too many people start a podcast just going, I want to help people. I want to talk about ideas that are going to help people, which is like every podcast out there, right? The amount of podcasts out there that just are a buzzword, and that's the name of the podcast. And so I think you really have to niche. You have to set a launch date. Too many people start a podcast, and if they don't have a launch date, no one's keeping you accountable, and you just kind of let it go. And then stay in the race, as you mentioned, Ronsley. I guess one of the keys to entrepreneurship is just staying in the race, and most people don't. I think 85% of podcasts don't make it past 7 episodes. Yep. And so be consistent, audience to none. I think, honestly, that's probably my biggest point with podcasting. Really connect with the audience and none, and try to get deeper. How do you make your podcast unique? How do you stand out? For me, I do all my interviews in person, which means I've missed out on opportunities of having enormous named guests on from America, but I'm okay with that. I've interviewed James. I had to do online through Zoom during COVID, which was, not ideal, but it was fine. And so, yeah, it's definitely got to be audience to none, and just, really connecting with why you want to do it. Because something we're seeing now is, I don't know if you guys are seeing this, Spotify is kind of reaching out to like every influencer and giving them their own show, which is like a genius play from Spotify, because it means all their audience is kind of going to follow. But I'm curious to see the long-term effects if these influencers can maintain a podcast, because it's a lot of work and it's not as glamorous as it may seem.
Yeah, they're going to release some crappy shows. They won't be good. Yeah, and doing that virtually, just like I did when you came on my show, Bar, and the fact that we know each other so well means we can slip straight into that banter mode, and we would do anything for each other anyway. So there was sort of less stress from a relationship perspective that can happen in person. It's just an absolute no-brainer, as is video, I believe, if you can swing it.
Like, I'll give you an example. I interviewed such a good episode. It's going to come out soon with this guy. It's probably the most driven young episode I've done, as in like the most holistic version of my show. It was an hour and a half, and he stayed in the studio for 4 hours. So he hung around for like 2 hours afterwards. He's just signed up with my roommate and his friend who have a TikTok marketing agency. He's just signed with them as clients. And that's because he came in person, and I got to network with him really long term. And so that's, for me, a huge benefit of in person, is the connections go even further. Some of my online ones, it's like they jump on, then they jump off, and it feels like, I was left like almost like I didn't get to connect with you. Like, I don't think I have a relationship. It was very, you came on the podcast. Whereas with in person, for me at least, it's just so deep, and I love that.
Yeah. I have someone who I've been trying to interview for the better part of probably 7 or 8 months, who's trying to be coming to LA, who is unbelievably well connected, who's been hitting me up every month, and I am deliberately just waiting, because I know in person the rapport, the connection you build is going to lead to so many bigger opportunities. I know that awkward feeling when you interview someone great and then the Zoom call ends and you're like, or whatever you're recording.
Yeah.
It's like, it's deflating. Let's get into today's tactic. Ronsley, 2 basic elements of an irresistible offer. What have you got for us today?
Yeah, well, this is something that I suppose we've been teaching our clients, because it obviously comes from having a podcast and having a business. But the main thing is, how do you convert all the things that you're doing with the podcast into business? And usually for us is like, we have the business owner starts the podcast, and they're not the podcaster. But they're the business owner, and they need to understand how to create an offer that becomes irresistible. So I believe there are 2 things that you need to have an irresistible offer. The first thing is, you need a believable outcome. So whatever you're letting this audience know, and Byron spoke about that earlier in the show, about the audience and the niche being so important, because it depends on that audience and niche as to what is a believable outcome for them. So if you create an offer that in their minds is not believable, which is the opposite of that, an unbelievable outcome, that there are a whole bunch of elements that become complex after you create an unbelievable offer. They can't see themselves doing it. So the second thing you need is an easy method, or an easy method for them to kind of go, okay, I want this transformation. I know how to get there. And both Byron and myself have followed the KPI methodology, and there's the 5 steps, the 7 steps, the 3 methods. It doesn't matter what you use, but what is your method to get them the result. And I believe that's a great offer, right? But if you don't have an easy method, you kind of explain that in complex jargon. And what happens with complex jargon is you confuse your audience, right? So if you have an offer that's complex and it's not believable in terms of an outcome, it's ignored. People don't even kind of care about it. If it's unbelievable and it's an easy method, it's seen as a scam offer. They go into that space where they're like, oh, this is just a scam, and I don't want. It's like the 6-minute abs or whatever. And if it's believable and it's complex, it's unrealistic. They don't feel it's realistic. So the 2 things you require, the 2 elements for a great offer, is a believable outcome and an easy method. But if you go higher up on that quadrant, you create this space here where you create an offer that just cannot be refused. So the more believable the outcome and the easier the method for that audience, you can create a really cool offer that cannot be refused. Gentlemen, I'm keen to get your thoughts on offers and what you've seen in the market.
Ronsley, that's absolutely huge. That is massive. Also, a shout out to Tim in Queensland. It was also fantastic. Sorry, Byron, that Queensland got a win in Game 1 of State of Origin the other day. I was up there early to watch that. So, hey Tim, hope you're doing good. Byron, what are your thoughts on what Ronsley just took us through there about the offer?
Yeah, I think it's so important to get those two right, because it's I think something I love about what Ronsley does so well, and I know you've learned this from like Taki and KPI and everything, is taking complex ideas and simplifying them in like visual ways, because that's something I've been trying to do with my program, is like, how do I strip it back so it's just, here's what you get. And so for me, it's a 2-part program. It's educational and social. And then if you go on my website, like we've got, kind of three parts of it. Every Monday night we do this. And I've just tried to keep it as simple as possible, because otherwise it gets too complicated, as you mentioned, and people just switch off. And I think it's like, there's a quote, I forget what it is. It's like, you're an excellent communicator when what you're saying is just a tip of the iceberg of what you know. And so you might know 100 things, but an excellent communicator only says the very, very tip. And I think that kind of sums up what you're trying to say there with the offer. And as a young entrepreneur, it's very easy to get, I guess, sucked into the sexiness of creating something that's so amazing, but it's like less is more in situations like this. So even just watching that was a good reminder for me as I'm working on my product. So I think it's great.
That was a mic drop there with that quote. So you can tell how much your presentation skills have gotten way, way better, because the way you just delivered that last minute was absolutely exceptional. And I think more of that. And if you can find that flow, I think, in your podcasting, in your speakers, in your speaking engagements, in everything that you do, I feel like, because you've done the reps, right? So that's what happens when you do the reps. When you do the reps, you're not scared to go onto a football field and play your game, right? It's because it's when you don't do the reps that you kind of want all the glory without being in the field doing the reps and doing the workouts, I suppose, the training.
100%. And that's where like I'm so comfortable on stage now and interviewing. Like I don't get nervous at all for interviewing. And I'm always trying to find stories. Like I've got like a bank of like 100 stories that I can just use as metaphors and insert and stuff. And I'm really trying to focus on that art. Because something I noticed, like I actually saw, I won't name him, but Ronsley, you know him from the Dent community. And he's been speaking for 20 years and he's kind of like one of the mentors. And he did a great presentation, but I was like, he wasn't that amazing of a presenter, because for me, I do 12-hour days teaching teenage kids who don't want to be there. And as a result, that's forced me to use all these NLP techniques, all these anchoring stuff, and really level up. And I've been focusing on that. And so I think, that's the beauty of going through, if it's a struggle, it forces you to level up. And just constantly trying to get better and get these little mic drop moments, as you mentioned.
And I know
presenting to a high school. I've done that a few times as well. That is, if you can do that, it's a bit like stand-up comedy. If you can present to a bunch of high school people who may not necessarily want to be there in the first place, get them engaged, get them excited about their future. Some of the toughest reps you can do, but certainly very meaningful.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rons.
No, well, I've actually never delivered to that age group before, which almost makes me feel like uh, I don't have any experience to sort of offer in that space, but I know exactly what Byron's talking about in terms of, seeing a mentor as a presenter and then kind of going, wait, there's so much more here that I can take this to, and I suppose staying in that state of constant learning is probably another element of being a really good entrepreneur, because things are changing so drastically, so quickly, so fast, that if you're not constantly evolving or constantly allowing yourself to pivot through the change, I suppose is probably the biggest skill you got to learn here.
Yeah, I signed with
100%.
I signed with a book publisher, and he invited me to an event that was put on by Success Magazine in Long Beach before I was even involved with them. And the book publisher had said to me afterwards, he goes, "You did something that I was not expecting, and it was one of the reasons why I was so excited to sign you as an author. While you were watching all of the other presenters, you were sitting there taking notes." And he asked me, he's like, "What were you taking notes on?" I said, "On the content, on their delivery, on everything. I was taking notes as an attendee, as a speaker. What are they doing with their volume? What stories they're telling, the content, all of those different things." And you see so many other people that rest on their laurels, and they're like, they're just dumb. They're using some crappy presentation from 20 years ago, or not focusing on what they can do to get more engagement. It's horrific. I'm surprised how common it is, actually.
Well, that's something I realized because Empower use 12-hour days. So you've got to keep them, you've got to do so much to keep them engaged, and you're forced to figure that out. Like when I saw this guy present, look, the content was great, and he was an excellent presenter. But for someone who's been doing it for 20 years, I think they just do the presentation and everyone loves them, that they don't have a need to level up, and they just keep doing it over and over again.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But it was really validating for me having a mentor who's been trained. I also don't think people train in presenting. They just get up there, they start presenting, and they just kind of get better over time. Correct. They don't actually go through of how to actually constantly be improving, studying, anchoring. We do all these incredible stuff that I've learned over the past kind of few years. And yeah, I mean, I think presenting is an incredible skill, and it's been such a fun journey for me. Like, I did my first presentation for my first original talk. Oh, well, not my first, but my first emotional talk that was about my life, and I was shitting myself, to be honest. It was very emotional, and it was 25 minutes, and it was the best talk I've ever done. Like, the whole crowd was crying. Someone wrote a 5-page letter to me about the talk. And that all came from, I guess, the podcast. It all comes back to the podcast. It all comes back to the podcast. So, yeah, again, another huge benefit of the podcast is your communication skills, and your ability to network just becomes so natural and so organic. And your ability to ask questions. Like Tim Ferriss has a great quote. It's like, the best questions are the ones that you haven't prepared. And I always get asked, how do you ask good questions? How do you ask quality questions? You got to listen. Like, most people aren't listening. They're waiting for their turn to speak. And it's like, you got to actively listen and comment on what they're saying, and figure out ways that you can add to that conversation and validate what they've said, which is a bit of a tangent there.
No, it's perfectly on point, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's huge. It's so well said. We might leave it there because the three of us could literally talk for hours. If that was useful for you, please drop a comment and let us know what landed. There's been so much value shared by these two legends. I'm just grateful to be in the same room as them. Go and grab a copy of the 10 biggest mistakes that you're making with your podcast and how to fix them. Just go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com, and you will see the three of us, hopefully the three of us, on the 10th and the 11th of November in Brisbane, Australia. Tickets are released on the 30th of August. This is an event not to be missed. It's going to be an absolute ton of fun. Byron, Ronsley, great to see you guys, and we'll see you real soon.
Cheers, boys.
See you, team.